A surprise offensive that completely caught the military dictatorship in Burma off guard. First units have surrendered. Large quantities of captured weapons and hundreds of square kilometers of conquered territory. In a lightning campaign, the rebels in Myanmar have severely cornered the military dictatorship ruling since the 2021 coup. Is this the beginning of the end of the longest ongoing armed conflict currently existing? In this video, we discuss the often forgotten war against the military dictatorship in Burma and address how the current offensive is related to illegal gambling, online scammers, and a German Kurdish 3D print designer. For nearly a month, a surprise offensive by an alliance of rebel groups has been achieving great success. We want to explain its significance, but this requires context. Therefore, the video is divided into the following chapters. First, the background of the last military coup. Second, the coup of February 1st, 2021. Third, the war flares up again. Fourth, the junta on the defensive. Fifth, surprise offensive Operation 1027. 6. Geopolitical significance, especially for China. And 7. The outlook. Since its independence from Great Britain in 1948, armed ethnic groups in Burma have fought for more rights or the independence against the central government. In this multi-ethnic country with over 130 recognized minorities, there have been about 20 ethnic armed organizations, EAOs, who have, interrupted by ceasefires, waged war against the military of the central government. In 1962, the military staged a coup and established a dictatorship that lasted for decades. After a long rule, the military junta in Burma, which had been renamed Myanmar, began handing over government affairs to a civilian government in 2011. However, in the military-dictated constitution, it continued to secure an overwhelming role in the state. For instance, the military automatically holds a quota of all parliamentary seats, the defense, interior, and border security ministries. Also, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces is not subject to civilian control. In the 2015 elections, the National League for Democracy, NLD, under Aung San Suu Kyi, won an absolute majority with 57.7%, while the military-aligned Union Solidarity and Development Party, the USDP, only achieved 28.2%. Aung San Suu Kyi, the daughter of the nation's founder Aung San, then took over the government, and a ceasefire was declared, followed by agreements with most of the EAOs. In the next election in 2020, the NLD gained even more, while the USDP continued to decline. The military responded with allegations of election fraud, which the USDP joined. The Election Commission dismissed the objection, and international observers said that despite not perfect elections, there was no doubt that the majority will was reflected in the results. When the military did not get its way through this process, it staged a coup in February 1st, 2021. It's an absurd video when a Burmese woman performs a dance in front of the road to the parliament to music, while behind her the military deploys to arrest the convening parliament. Suu Kyi, President Win Myint, and other high-ranking members of the government and the NLD were arrested while a state of emergency was declared, justified by the military with the previously alleged election fraud. Speculation is, however, that the coup occurred because the commander-in-chief would have had to retire in a few months due to the age limit. This would have not only potentially subjected him to prosecution for his handling of the Rohingya, but also allowed the civilian president to appoint a more reform-minded successor. Whatever the reason, after the people had been able to smell the scent of freedom for several years, the willingness to accept another military dictatorship was no longer present in large parts of the country. Nationwide protests began. With civil disobedience, the population resisted the military junta. The military ruled with a brutal violence, leading to thousands of deaths. Tens of thousands were arrested, thousands of whom were killed, according to human rights organizations. As peaceful protests met with violence, in September 2021, deposed NLD members formed a shadow government and called for a popular uprising against the military. Initially, without large numbers of defectors, the resistance fighters had to rely on a few existing hunting weapons, but also on a design that Jakob Duigu, a German Kurd, put on the internet. He had developed the FGC-9, a weapon that can be self-manufactured through 3D printing and other home-based activities. He himself had pointed out this exact scenario as a possible use. Oppressed peoples needing to defend themselves against their government. The forming People's Defense Force, PDF, with over 300 subgroups, produced the weapons in series and then used them, along with other improvised weapons, to fight the military and police, increasingly capturing their weapons and waging an increasingly successful guerrilla war against the junta's security forces. In addition to the new PDF, old, more experienced resistant groups also entered the fray. More and more of the 2015 negotiated ceasefires broke down in the following months, accelerating the destabilization of the country. While some EAOs remained neutral, others resumed fighting, and the junta now had to deal not only with old rebel groups but also with the PDF of the pro-democratic parallel government. To unite the resistance against the regime, the opposition shadow government promised to repeal the 2008 constitution and introduce a federal union with greater autonomy for all regions and regional parliaments. The rebel groups would not gain their independence, but would have extensive controls over the affair of their ethnic groups if the parallel government could eliminate the regime. The Myanmar majority population, previously supportive of the military and a pillar of the dictatorship, became divided, with 32 million people or 69% of the population. Former strongholds of regime support, such as Sagaing and Magwe, suddenly became centers of resistance. The lack of support, even among the Myanmar, led to an erosion of manpower through defectors, desertion, losses, and inadequate recruitment. Attacks in the hinterland, assassinations of officers further demoralized them. Military academies reportedly have only partially filled classes because not enough young men want to fight for the regime. According to experts' estimates, of its once alleged 400,000 soldiers, only about 150,000 remain today. Only 70,000 of them are combat troops. They are supported by 70,000 national police, 12,000 of whom also serve as combat troops, as well as an additional 15,000 border troops and militias. Now the Tatmadaw is reportedly relying on a few elite units that must be sent from one hotspot to another, as the overall strength is not sufficient to exercise real control in a country of this size with 53 million people. Because no continuous frontline exists like in an interstate war, patrols and garrisons must be maintained everywhere to secure supplies and contain constant attacks on supply and communication lines. Also, in the cities, attacks and assaults on government troops have become more frequent, but the junta still holds on to most urban areas, losing control of the countryside. The strength of the military is so eroded that there are reports of family members of soldiers being used for defense at individual military bases, and the military has mobilized workers from state arms factories as combat troops. To compensate for its weakness in personnel, the military has resorted to using its superior firepower through artillery and fighter jets for punitive actions where its manpower is not sufficient to recapture or hold territory. However, this has had the opposite effect, and the ranks of the rebels continue to receive new recruits from the affected. In fact, Myanmar's military, the Tatmadaw, is probably in its weakest state since the independence, causing its decades-long strategy of divide et impera, divide and conquer, to fail. In the past, the military had repeatedly concluded ceasefires with EAOs to free up troops to fight other EAOs. This worked reliably, as the ethnic resistance groups had different interests, especially when a strong military was the EAO's negotiating partner. The Arakan Army, the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, and the Taung National Liberation Army had so far only trained resistance fighters of the PDF and had occasional minor skirmishes with government troops, but refrained from any significant activity. This changed on October 27, 2023. The Three Brotherhood Alliance, formed by the three groups, launched a coordinated surprise offensive in northern Shan State, completely surprising government troops. In the operation, named 1027 after the date, at least 196 military bases were overrun in just 4 weeks, and important towns were captured. Several prisoner camps were also reached and the inmates freed. Initially, the transport hub Senvi fell to the rebels. Later, the border crossing to China at Chinchefhao. Other strategically important towns were encircled. This border at Chinchefhao had accounted for 40% of cross-border trade with China until then. The majority of the rest of the border is either mountainous jungle or in the hand of other rebel groups. Thus, the junta was cut off from a significant part of the bilateral trade with its most important trading partner and political supporter. In a statement on the offensive, the Three Brotherhood Alliance declared that it wanted to bring its own territory under control, but also to defeat the junta. The alliance fight for its own settlement area has suddenly also become a fight for the whole country. Moreover, the alliance declared that it also wanted to fight organized crime, and this is where China comes into play. In the northern tip of the Golden Triangle, organized Chinese crime has spread in recent years, tolerated by the military junta, which has earned billions from it. It is believed that 120,000 people have been smuggled, or perhaps more accurately, abducted from China to Burma to defraud people worldwide in scam factories. These people are forced to work, often under conditions of torture and sexual violence. The People's Republic of China has increasingly become dissatisfied with this, but the military regime has been earning too well to act against it. While the regime has shifted from an initially neutral position to increasingly support the junta, it has maintained close contact with several rebel groups, some of which, like the National Democratic Alliance Army, are Kokang Chinese and closely connected to Yunnan. This close contact did not prevent the Three Brotherhood Alliance from starting their offensive and explicitly calling for the overthrow of the regime, thus moving away from ethnic particular interests. The declaration to fight against organized crime is likely intended as a gesture to Beijing to secure its favor. Some criminals have already reportedly been handed over to Chinese police. The dynamics of the fighting makes it unlikely that China can stop the alliance after the criminals are eliminated, even though the People's Republic has already called for a ceasefire. China may get what it wants with the criminals, but its bet on the junta seems to be failing, and Myanmar is of great strategic importance to the People's Republic. Gas and oil pipelines to the Bay of Bengal, which allows China to bypass the Strait of Malacca and thus be safer from blockade, run through Shan. Numerous other Belt and Road projects are planned in the former Burma. However, even if China has alienated the shadow government with its support for the junta, China will continue to play an important role. If it wants, it could potentially make another EAO, the United Wa State Army, a factor in this conflict. This group is equipped by China and has 20,000 to 30,000 men under arms, possesses artillery and even its own helicopters, making it the strongest EAO. Currently, it maintains its ceasefire with the junta, has declared neutrality, and announced that it will fight everyone who ventures into its territory. Depending on Beijing's influence on the UWSA, it could intervene on one of the sides. Operation 1027 has shown that the resistance is willing to form alliances. The goal is no longer just to control one's own territory, but explicitly to overthrow the military regime. Inspired by the successes, the People's Defense Forces have now taken Kwalin, in Saigon, as well as Kampat on the Indian border. Intense fighting is also occurring in Chin, Kaya, and Rakhine. The demonstrated weakness of the junta has encouraged many other groups to go on the offensive as well, worsening the situation for the Tatmadaw. The morale of the government troops is noticeably declining. More and more bases and units are surrendering, sometimes even in the hundreds. At the same time, the weakening of the military makes it increasingly unlikely that individual groups will be bribed by the divide and conquer principle to allow a regrouping of troops through a ceasefire. For the first time since the independence, the military regime is in serious danger of being defeated. Before the offensive, a stalemate was seen between the actively fighting forces and the government. But Operation 1027 has changed this. The successful surprise offensive has encouraged all opposition groups. The promised decentralization by the shadow government has the potential to create a goal acceptable to all. From cautious distance, more and more EAOs are now moving towards massive cooperation, suggesting further military successes. In addition, the rebels have not only made significant territorial gains, but also captured a large amount of weapons and ammunition, artillery, armored vehicles, and heavy 14.5mm machine guns, effective against low-flying combat helicopters of the Tatmadaw. Heavy fighting had already taken place in the states of Cochin and Sagaing. Before the offensive, the connection through the northern Shan state was cut off after the fall of Senwi, worsening the situation there as well. The junta has been clearly surprised and shocked by this development. The president, appointed by the military, former general Min Tswe, has warned that the country is falling apart, probably also to gain the support of China, India, and Thailand, who are interested in a stable neighboring country. After all, for decades, the assumption was only the military can hold Burma together. Whether this will be successful is anything but clear. Nevertheless, the regime is still capable of great destruction, and its leaders can expect tribunals in the event of defeat, which raises fears among observers of a Pyrrhic victory. Should the Tatmadaw use its superior firepower indiscriminately? Some EAOs also have a questionable past regarding human rights compliance, and theoretically, a victory over the junta would not necessarily mean the end of the fighting, which could then take place among the EAOs over the spoils. In any case, it indeed looks like the rebels might be able to bring down the central government after almost 80 years. Whatever happens, we will cover it here on the channel. If you don't want to miss it, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. If you want to support the channel with a donation, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.